Missions are very uncontrolled, they're very unpredictable.
Roadside bomb goes off next to a Humvee. This individual may have head injuries, they may have pneumothoraces, long bone fractures, so they may be showing up neurologically unstable with very unstable vital signs.
So they're being brought in with tourniquets and maybe an IV, maybe not.
What we do is provide the damage control surgery to get them to an actual facility that can provide them long-term health care.
The ground surgical team is definitely one of the most dynamic areas that you can be deployed in, because you can be everywhere from working inside a fixed facility, so a relatively secure location, all the way to being relatively far forward and close to the fight.
It extends the operational capability of the combatant commanders.
Kind of the last and separate mission is for humanitarian missions as well.
The ground surgical team will be looking at spaces like a wooden shack. We also are looking at shipping containers. It could be multiple shipping containers put together. It could be tents. We could also use any kind of buildings that have been abandoned or that we've taken over during missions.
We can set up anywhere.
And then be light enough and be mobile enough to move to another location based on the tasking.
We originally had something that was called a mobile field surgical team, or an MFAST. The ground surgical team really is a spin-off of that concept. The team got a little bit smaller, so instead of 10 individuals, it scaled down to 6.
A surgeon, ER physician, a CRNA or an anesthesiology provider, a surgical tech, an MSc, and a critical care or trauma nurse.
Our entire lives are out of these 14 bags that weigh a total of 1.5 tons.
It can be moved by Humvee, it can be moved by helicopter, it can be moved by cargo aircraft.
And it's really more modular, so we can customize the bags based on the response that's needed.
The team is capable of doing up to 10 surgical cases depending on the acuity of the patient without resupply.
You have limited medications that you have to work with, limited fluids that you have to choose from.
I mean, everybody is moving in sync, everybody knows what we need to do.
The more severe the patients coming into you, or the more patients you have, the more that teamwork is important.
In the current construct, the ground surgical team training happens 12 times a year, but we train 2 teams with each class.
And we try and bring them up to one common level of knowledge and medical understanding of terminology, and then we test that by putting in situations where they probably didn't expect what was going to come to them.
From what we've learned from Afghanistan and Iraq, bringing it here and helping prepare us for what we'll see.
We can actually have a prior ground surgical team deployer come and speak to the students, and it gives the students the opportunity to ask a lot of questions and hear the story of somebody that's actually done this mission before.
We stress them as hard as humanly possible in situations that pushes them, and we can see them starting to break down. That way they can identify, my team needs to communicate better when this happens.
The team has to consider the strengths and weaknesses of one another and how they can best apply that to the clinical situation.
And stress could mean heat, cold, sleep deprivation, more patients than what they typically would be able to handle.
The training is geared to getting us ready for the real world environment, which they're not going to come in at 1 at a time. They could come in at 6 at a time.
The training pipeline for the ground surgical team is divided into 2 phases. So the first phase occurs here now at USAF SAM here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
This is where they get introduced to what the team concept is, what their roles will be, how it fits in with the combatant commander's perspective, how they will be utilized in the deployed environment,
as well as medical simulations in which the students are presented with a variety of different types of patients. These mannequins have the ability for the students to actually perform surgery. They can actually start an IV. They can actually infuse fluids.
In the simulations, they're very chaotic. You could see a multitude of 1 to up to 5 or 6 patients coming in at one time.
So students really feel the intensity of the time that it takes to complete these tasks, as well as seeing the real-time feedback of their failure to do them as quickly as they think that they maybe are doing them in their minds.
They're squirting blood, they're blinking, they're making noises, they're groaning at you. So for a simulation, it's about as real as it can get.
So one of the things that we do is we add the component of a live actor as well. And that allows us to add a little bit more fidelity and a little bit more of a dynamic environment.
We tell that patient to be a little bit problematic. We have cadre that are watching from a sim lab that's in the middle of both nomads with TV screens, so they can take notes of everything that they do.
So it's really kind of interesting to see students walk out of the simulation actually red-faced and covered in sweat because they really were feeling the tense and emotional toll of the patient in front of them.
Then they come down here to Camp Bullis. They spend a week with the EMEDS construct because they provide the surgical support for the EMEDS facility. So they learn how to integrate with a larger team, and then we spend a couple of days giving them intense stress-induced scenarios
where they're truly operating in austere conditions out in the field at Camp Bullis.
I think that it helps get your hands going, gets your mind kind of helps you develop muscle memory for when it actually occurs.
What do you got?
We do attempt to recreate the battle environment with noise because noise is an additional stressor. It's difficult to hear if you're worried about your own safety because you hear gunshots in the background, your stress level goes up and your reaction times change.
We always start a debrief by saying, how do you feel that you did? And most of the time the students just start spilling their guts. They're so excited with all of the information that they've learned that as instructors, we often can sit back and just recognize that the learning has occurred actively through their hands-on skills. Everybody really has to step out of their comfort zone, and in order to be successful, you have to know that you have a strong team working alongside you to do that.
So if I can teach 12 people at once every 2 weeks to go down there and save the lives of the people who are fighting for our freedom, I want to make sure they have every skill available to do that job.
I knew that this was my skill set and my passion, and I knew if I brought that out there to the soldiers, the airmen, whoever we're serving, that I could do a lot of good and bring people home.